Okay, hello everyone. We're really excited for our last and final session, which is going to be an Ask Me Anything with the incredible Candice Matthews-Brackeen. For all of you who want to get a little bit more about this with the Ask Me Anything, all you need to do is add your questions into the chat. So add them in, you can mark it as a question or you could just leave it there. I will be facilitating all of the questions. So this is now your chance. Anything burning that is on your mind, please add it in. And Candice will be here on deck to answer the questions. And so for those of you who don't know Candice, she is the founder and CEO of Lighthouse, the Cincinnati-based portfolio service with accelerators I'm sure you've heard of, like Hillman and Numi. She also has a venture capital fund, Lightship, where she serves as managing partner. And Lighthouse companies work together in support of underrepresented early stage transformational businesses. She's also an award-winning founder herself with 15 years experience in entrepreneurship at companies like Hello Parent, as well as a board member on a number of startups and nonprofits. And we are also really, really lucky to have her as a longtime friend and supporter of Black Women Talk Tech. So thank you so much, Candice, for being here. And while we wait for some of these questions to roll in, I'll kick it off and get started. So since you are on a lot of these different startups as investor and as a board member, how are some of your founders coping with this environment right now? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, it's been a lot of like triage work over the last, I guess, almost 2 months now. So we left the office, March 12th was our last day in the office. And since then, it's really just been every day with portfolio companies. Some of it is disaster relief and trying to figure out how do you get a company to pivot or work on something potentially that they had put, to the side for a while. And for others, it's making sure they get through PPP applications. Half of our portfolio right now has been accepted and has either received their money or are waiting for money. So it's been a lot of daily work, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we're all seeing that right now, as everyone has had to pivot or change or adapt in some kind of way. So I think it's really helpful to hear from you that this is happening with all these startups and they're seeing some kind of shift in movement and change as well for that. So our first question from Toby, she's wondering what resources are available to early stage pre-seed startups that want to protect IP via patents.
So not everything needs a patent right away. So that's an expensive process. You don't have to give away all of your information in order to test something. So I would say go into market and test before you go through the process of paying an attorney to have something patented. I would say that it is going to be incredibly difficult to find a pre-seed funder to help pay for the patent process. It was hard pre-COVID. It will be even more difficult post-COVID, unless maybe it's in the COVID space. I'm not certain, but it's always difficult to have someone else pay for your patent work.
I 100% agree with that. I think oftentimes we jump right into thinking we need a patent, and you don't actually need a patent to get your business started. Like you said, it is incredibly timely, it's incredibly costly. And so think about building your business out in other ways. I think that's great advice. So from Joy, she says she is an early stage startup in need of some guidance on how to handle someone that's interested in being a partner in her business. She does not want them to have a role in her company or perhaps a buy-in. And maybe they just pay me for my business intelligence and intellectual capital, which is what they're really after. So how does she deal with this situation?
Well, that sounds like a situation.
Yeah.
Joy, I'm not sure what's going on. Do you need a restraining order? I'm not sure. Anyone who you feel like isn't a value add to your business, you don't have to say yes. Women need to learn how to say no and push more people away. Sometimes you're going to hurt people's feelings. Unfortunately, you just kind of have to push away and maybe work and talk to some other people in your community that maybe know this person and maybe they are coming from a good place. But if it feels bad in your gut, it's probably right.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, the people that you partner with are so important to your business. And if you don't feel good about it, don't let them in any way. So
Yep.
yeah, I love that answer. So question for myself in terms of what you were saying earlier that you're seeing everyone in your portfolio making some sort of changes. Have you seen any really inspiring pivots, or you said that some are experiencing and trying out things that they were looking at in the past? So what of those have been working? Have you seen any like really cool pivots that are actually moving forward?
Yeah. So we have, how much can I say about this? So, okay, I can say it. So we have a company who's in the restaurant business. And so imagine just how terrible that must be. Sales are down significantly. And this particular company was kind of putting off a large project with a large food manufacturer. And so right now they're building out a test project with this really large corporation. And so for them, it gives them a new vertical to work in, as opposed to strictly focusing on that restaurant vertical. So now if they can work with food manufacturers, that's much better than strictly being in this one space. Because we all know that while restaurants, at least in our state, open on Friday, not everyone's going to go in. Right. And it's going to be a while, and it could be years before that happens. So now what they're working on is pulling money from money they had saved. They weren't living kind of month to month on their burn. They had saved enough money to work on this project. We were also able to find them a significant matching grant to get them to build out this project with the food corporation.
That's incredible. And that's really inspiring to hear that we're seeing success even in these times where things may be a little bit harder, but they're able to sort of push through and use their resources. So I love that.
I would also add, I'm sure lots of people are following Dawn Dixon's crowdfunding campaign. So Dawn Dixon from Popcom, my spouse happens to be on the board there. And she launched a crowdfunding campaign during COVID. And I think is approaching $900,000 raised so far in the last, 37 days. And I think we'll see her go over $1 million. And I think that that's a huge, huge inspiration to have something like that happen. And I think more of us need to figure out how can we be nimble and take advantage of this, this time where we have nothing but a captive audience.
Definitely. And Dawn is the queen of crowdfunding and ICO. So if you are not following her, make sure you go out and check this out. But that is really inspiring. I think one of the questions we had earlier was, are people still investing? Like, is this still happening? And so it's great to see an actual example of that. So Noreen's question is, how are people dealing with their commitment to their life and businesses and staying focused, which I think is an incredibly important question right now. She recommends personal life coaches, but what do you recommend, and what have you been doing as well, Candice?
I'm enjoying the sunshine, so I'm going outside, I'm walking a lot. Now I have 2 children and they're still in school. So, every day I'm getting them up first thing in the morning, and now I'm not only a teacher, but I'm also the lunch lady. And I'm working my full day. We're running Numi and Hillman and making the pivots with those organizations, but also raising a fund because fundraising doesn't stop even during COVID. So how am I balancing it as well as I can with a little bit of walking in between meetings? But I would say I'm working the same length of a work day, sometimes even longer, because you have to kind of connect to people whenever they're there. It's hard. I have a therapist. I think everybody does. And I recommend Talkspace because it helps to talk it out with somebody other than your spouse.
That is a great point. I think those are all really good resources. And like you said, it can be something like Talkspace if you feel like you're just getting into therapy or just getting into coaching in some way. That's a great way to get started in it. So I love that. And so a couple questions on funding here. So are there any sites or companies you would suggest looking up for funding? She says she wants to start her own summer camp. So I think that's really interesting in terms of the types of funding that you are raising for a summer camp versus something that might be more tech or scalable. What are your thoughts there for her in terms of funding?
So, I really strictly focus on venture capital, so highly scalable companies. Typically, we do invest in brick and mortar companies, but they are typically personal investments as an angel investor. So we tend to steer clear of those unless we're not really going in with other people there. For a summer camp, I would need a little bit more explanation of the summer camp considering COVID. So is this virtual summer camp? Is this in-person summer camp? Because, I don't know what the market looks like for in-person summer camp this summer. I don't know the funding mechanisms for that particular sector, if I'm being honest.
And I think that's a great question, and I'll just piggyback off of it. So if you have an idea that may not be right now, right? No one's going to summer camp at the moment, but could be great in the future. Is now still a great time to go out to investors and start talking to them and sort of building that relationship? Or do you think that it comes off as insensitive or just not really being aware of what's happening right now? What do you suggest for people?
Yeah, I think it's a good pick your brain time of year. I think that it's always good for, virtual coffee meetings are great. A lot of investors right now are trying to save what's in their portfolio. We have 10 companies that we're trying to save, and 10 of them are always running out of money. So really better understanding, like, who is that investor? Do they have dry powder? Are they making investments right now? Do they invest in my particular space? Like, figuring out what it means, like, who is that investor and what do they actually do, I think is the most important thing to start with, so that you don't waste your own time and you don't waste their time as well. So I think it would just take a little bit of research and figuring out kind of like who is that best fit.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think Linda's question sort of jumps on that, where would you recommend traditional VC fundraising at this time? And it seems like it depends on where you're at and build those relationships.
Yeah, it depends on where you're at. If it's a good company, it's a good company and people are going to invest. We're still looking at companies. We still have companies in due diligence, and we're still raising a fund. We had our first fund close end of February. We'll have our next fund close in the next 3 weeks. And I feel pretty confident that we'll oversubscribe our fund. And we were able to do that during this time. So we're fundraising. We're going to be deploying capital. And I know other people have recently closed funds. Harlem Capital's not too far off. And so there are people who have money to deploy. It's just whether or not it's something people are willing to risk at this particular moment in time. And by that, I mean, okay, let's say I'm making a $250,000 investment in your company, but what's your runway? Is that money with other people's money going to get you 18 to 24 months out? Because I don't want you to start fundraising in 6 months again. I don't want you to even be fundraising in a year, because what's that actually going to look like? Because I don't think anyone knows what the world's going to look like in 6 or 12 months at all. So whatever you're going to raise with my money, you also have to raise alongside with some other people.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. And we talked a lot earlier about that runway, right? And how do you assess whether you have enough, whether you continue down the road you're in, when you make that shift. And I think that's really important, like you said, when you're talking to investors, to understand that that's going to be a question, right, that they have. How are you dealing with this, and what's your plan? So I love this question from Sandy. What advice do you have for high school students who want to start a business or to be open about a career in tech, accounting, or business?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, go for it. You have no responsibility. And now's the time to learn. I think that if there's any group of people who are going to fix all of these problems, it's the youngest people in our society. We recently had a high school intern with us at Hillman. She was a rock star and has a business idea, and we're helping her to work through it. And so if you have an idea, do it, and do it in college. Work on it in college. One of our companies we invested in, she came up with the idea in her undergrad, worked on it all the way through her master's, and is still working on that company and has raised a lot of money doing what she did. So I think she's been working on that since her sophomore year. And that's huge. So if you have something in high school right now, do it. And yeah, I have nothing but the utmost, respect for something like that. Working in the space, that's good too. As long as you're in a company that there's a culture to teach you what you want to learn, so that you can take that information as you go and start your own thing. Because it sounds like you're already a starter. And is this Sandy's question, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like Sandy, it sounds like you're already a starter. It sounds like you already want to do things. So make sure that the company, if you do decide to go into a startup or you do want to, kind of just sit alongside, that you are finding a group of people that are willing to kind of pour their knowledge into you instead of just taking. Because sometimes you get into an organization and you just get stuck in a cubicle or you're just stuck at a desk and you aren't making decisions and you aren't exposed to things. And I think it's that exposure that's going to get you where you need to in the long term.
Yes, I love that. And I wished when I was in my teens and college that I was a little more entrepreneurial, when I had the time and more energy and really just the ability to kind of jump in there. So I 100% agree with that, everything that you said. So question from Empress. She wants to start a virtual workshop for young women in her community, but she's not sure about her business model. How can she navigate through this to find out, or if she should do it?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, you have a captive audience right now. So try and test. Maybe you test it with a Facebook group and you try to monetize the Facebook group. I think it's wholly a possibility. And you can test anything and not quit your day job. And right now, your day and your night are all blended into one. So, really, who's keeping tabs at this point? As long as you're not doing a mediocre job at your day job, give it a try. I think there are great people like Felicia Hatcher from Code Fever and Black Tech Week who've done a fantastic job of monetizing their audience. So going online and maybe finding her on Facebook and following some of the ways that she's done it, I think could be a great avenue to follow. There's a lot to be learned from her and others who've been able to monetize those folks.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think a virtual workshop is something that you can easily go out and test and see if people are interested in without really having to put too much time or resources or money into it. So definitely.
Yeah. And there's a couple of platforms like Teachable. I think there's another one called Thinkific. And you can kind of build your own workshop there. And there are live components or kind of just like guided, self-guided components that you can do. It doesn't all need to be live in that moment. So you could spend some time building your entire course curriculum and then pushing it out. And if you can get through the point of kind of building the whole thing, then maybe you do have something.
Absolutely. I love that. So Cami says, industries such as retail have taken a hit. And even though there's an increase in online activity, the metrics show that this is not trickling down to smaller retailers. So what is your advice to smaller retailers to raise their profile during this pandemic? It's a great question.
Yeah, you've got to really figure out how to re-engage your audience. Everything that you were doing before just has to be amplified. We have some, great small businesses here who have rallied together as groups, and they're almost becoming their own little co-op. So there's kind of a co-op of restaurants. There's a co-op of just standard retailers, and they're selling together in a way, and they're pubbing each other through their social media outlets. Like there's only so many days I can eat an arepa. There's only so many Black-owned baseball caps that I can buy. But as a group, they're coming up with these kind of bundles and working together. So if your social doesn't have it on your own, maybe work with a co-op group and sell together. But I think it's important right now to get as much of your work online and make it as easy as possible and frictionless for the person purchasing. I also think it's great to make sure that it's as personalized as possible, because I'm doubling down on the people who I almost feel as if I'm supporting their family. There's a place where I get kind of these hot steamed buns, and once a week I go and I feed my kids and myself. And every week I go and I tip 25%. Every week I go and I get something else from some other person. And I'm just only focusing on 3 locations. And that's all I know that I can do. So, find that raving fan and try to get them to support you. And I'm sure you have that group, that 100 people that are always there in the store. Find them. They're on social media. Even if you have to spend some time, finding Bob who comes in every day. It's just going to take a little bit more hand-to-hand combat than it did before. But you really have to kind of personalize those relationships.
I agree. And I think a lot of people are really receptive to the struggles of business owners right now and want to support them. There's this really great initiative in Austin called the ATX Kit, and they just put all these small business products and foods into a box, and you can just purchase it. And most of that money will go back to small businesses. And so there's a lot of ways to not only support each other, but people are looking to find ways to make sure that the communities and brands that they love are still there.
Yeah.
So another question we have is, pitching a service that hasn't been created in the pet industry to investors has been tough. So what are some tips you have to secure the one? Say that one more time. Pitching a service that hasn't been created in the pet industry to investors has been really tough. So what are some tips that you have to secure an investor? Okay. Oh gosh, if it's a great idea, then you're going to secure an investor. It's just finding that kind of right group. So, you know, who invested in Chewy? Who invested in Chewy really early on? I'm sure all of those people still exist in Miami, Florida, right? Because that's where they were before they exited. There are plenty of people here in Cincinnati. We had a company called Pet Brosia. We invested in that space. IMES was created here in Cincinnati through Procter & Gamble. So who are the people who know pet food better than anyone else? And if it's not food, you know, is it the toy? Is it healthcare? So finding out who really invests really early on. There could be an angel syndicate somewhere that is investing in a lot of pet care. So finding the group or the person just sometimes takes some business intelligence and a lot of you know, sitting on Google and going to AngelList and going to LinkedIn. And asking around, but you can kind of generally figure out who sits on a board somewhere, who are those people connected to. People love to let you know when they've had a win. So I'm sure those Chewy investors have somewhere investor in Chewy. So just figuring out who those people are. But if it's good, it's good. There was just recently a pet company that came our way, and I would have never in a million years thought that this thing was a thing. And then you start looking it up and you start talking to other people. Gosh, and if that thing hits, it's going to hit big. So I would say it's always a good time to engage an investor. If they ghost you, maybe just not right now. It's not the right time. But I think you try. There's no reason you shouldn't try, because all those reps are important. Mm-hmm. They suck, but they're important. Absolutely. And another one in the pet industry is the Mars Pet Accelerator. So I would look into that. They take a number of companies every couple months, specifically in the pet space. So if you're, like you said, find the ones that are focused in the industry that you're in. So I think that's great. So from Tanya, she says her business is situated in a rural community. She specializes in healthcare marketing for rural FQHCs and nonprofits. Needless to say, there are barriers to scale due to locale and the current political climate in rural Missouri community. So she's thinking of opening a second office in Kansas City area to reach a more diverse client base. So what should she consider before making this move from a financial standpoint? See if the folks in KC can help. Find out who's the mover and shaker there. I've got some contacts at the Kansas City Economic Development. They paid for us to come out and run a new me class there. So spent a ton of time in KC. And I know that Rodney Sampson Opportunity Hub are there. I'm not sure how much they're still engaged in the community, but just running it by someone and finding out, like, just because you're in a city doesn't mean that you're going to find the right support. Sometimes there's just not a good fit. So not every city does a good job with second offices and kind of wooing people and helping them with tax credits, et cetera. So just making sure that that is the right place for you, I think is most important before you move. Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that. I think that's great advice. So we have a few minutes left. If you have any more burning questions, get them in now. We have about 5 minutes left. So one question for you, Candice, what are some resources right now that you have found useful during this time that business owners can take advantage of? Resources that I've found useful.
Sheesh, that's a hard one. Right now, I think I'm just consuming everything that everyone is sending my way.
Yeah. And where are you finding the things that people are sending? Is it emails or listservs? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm hitting new calls. So, this Webinarjam, like this is new for me. And so I'm like, this is super dope. It works well. It's not, it's very clean. Like, so every time I run into kind of these new tools, that's what's helpful. So we recently found StreamYard. It helps you to stream to multiple platforms, but all in something super clean like this. That was a huge win. Other things that have been easier, I mean, lots of new plugins that we're using on Slack. But I've also been laying off my team a little bit, right? So we're not as, I've never been a micromanager, but I'm way less than I was before. Everything's still getting done. So I haven't had to kind of pile on lots of new things their way. Really, I think what we're working on right now is just process improvement for when we get back to a more normal way of life.
Yeah, and I think that's great if you can say a couple words in terms of stepping back and how your managerial style has changed throughout this time, because I think some people, their instinct might be to micromanage, like you said, especially when they're moving from being around their teams to remote. So how has your management style changed, and why did you make those changes as well?
I've always been a hugger, so I'm going to miss hugging. But for me, like what was most important was that my team was healthy. And I'm always asking, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? It's like we have a couple of single people. And so I couldn't imagine being single during this and not really having any interaction or human touch. I think it would be incredibly difficult. So we have a few single people on the team. And so just saying, like, how can I help? And someone last week was like, what would be really helpful is a Talkspace membership. Perfect.
That's great.
That's not going to cost me much of anything. Like, that's great. Or I need XYZ. Like, okay, great. I will drop that off to your house. And so for me, the style has been a little bit flipped toward dealing with things that are personal as opposed to professional as much. We've just making sure that we're good as humans more than anything. And just making sure that the workday is condensed for a lot of people, just because other people are dealing with other things. And just because you don't have kids doesn't mean you don't have an aging parent. Just because you don't have kids doesn't mean you don't have a dog. Just because you don't have kids doesn't really freaking matter, right? Like, you still have a life just like everyone else. So for me, the style has been more like, let's worry about the human before we worry about the work. And then on the work side, like prioritizing what really matters. So for us, like what matters is, can we run payroll? And if we can't, can we be honest about that? Or what are we going to do when we can't do Noomies anymore, right? We can't go and live in a house with 10 people 10 times a year. So we've had to figure out what life is going to look like on the other side. So really just taking a step back, figuring out the personal, and then just being honest about what needs to be accomplished, not just what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Taking the personalized approach. I think we've been seeing that people feel so overwhelmed that they're working all day, every day. And so for you to say, take care of yourself first is incredible. And I think for all business owners, we need to be thinking about our people, because without them, can't move forward at all.
Right,
so
at all.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for the last two questions we have in here. So Anissa says she's from Dayton, Ohio. And do you have any upcoming virtual events with Lighthouse to get her idea in front of investors?
Woo, good question. It's like I planted her here.
Right.
Right from Ohio. So tonight at 7 p.m. on Twitch, if you go to twitch.com/Lightship Capital, or if you go to our website, we have an online pitch competition where we will take 12 companies over the next 5 weeks, pitching head to head. You can apply at our website, lightship.capital. We've only selected the first 2 companies, so we have 10 more slots for pitching. The grand prize is $5,000. That is being sponsored by PitchBook and Amazon. And next season, we've already got our next sponsor. But no, we would love to see your application. It's the same application for Lightship Capital, Numi Bootcamp, Hillman Accelerator, and Twitch Pitch. That one requires a 5-minute video, however, because we use that to run on air. But that's what we've got virtually happening now. And then our next virtual item will be called Numi Now, because we can't do Numi anywhere else. So we'll be doing Numi Now, and that'll be our virtual bootcamp. But those details will come out at the beginning of June.
That is awesome. So make sure that you check out I see the link in here, lightship.capital. So make sure you go there and check out exactly all those amazing resources. And then the last question we have is, the tourism industry is taking a hit. What advice do you have for that space?
Really just look for the signals and figure out how things are going to come back, how slowly they will happen. People are going to travel. That's just the nature of who we are as humans. Everyone wants to see the world before they die. So the tourism industry will come back, but it'll be slow. And I think we all know and see that. And the way that we do it is going to be different. Members of my family have been on an airplane since this has happened. I have traveled out of town to kind of another personal space, another house. And that has happened. So people are going to move because we just can't help it as humans, but it's going to be a slow and steady chug. And if you have a good company, it will survive. If you have a good company, it could not survive, but you have to figure out if you're willing to do what it takes without causing harm to yourself long-term financially.
Yeah, I think that is great advice. Any last parting words that you have for everyone in terms of advice or resources or anything that you've been doing that has been helpful to keep them through this time?
I would just say keep pushing. Don't stop what you're doing. It's okay to cry. This stuff sucks. I've definitely had my days. Yesterday, John Krasinski did some little silly thing called Some Good News. And they were doing graduations for 2020 graduates. And you watch it and you just cry. So give yourself, the grace to feel all of this stuff that's happening. And keep pushing through, because you were strong before and you're strong now. It's just not easy. So I'm always available. I'm at Candice Brackeen on all social media. You can hit the DMs. These folks here always know how to find me, and members of my team and myself are always available. That's just who we are. We love to do the work. So I appreciate you for having me today.
Thank you so much for being here. This was incredible. So you can find Candice at Candice Brackeen or on lightship.capital. Make sure you check her out, follow up with her. Thank you so much. You are the best.
All right. See you later. Thank you.